All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Chadvocate channel. This is episode 2, following up my intro. I'm going to be trying to stream 3 days a week, from 7:30 to 8:30, maybe 9:30, depending on how active the channel gets. Why we started the channel? I think we got one country, two realities, so we're trying to break people out of that information loop, looking for big structural change, and ultimately to try to unite the left wing. Progressives, liberals, social democrats, moderates, independents, and end the circling firing squad, really. I know it's going to be a task in and of itself to try to get everybody on one page. But, that's what we're really here for, and that's the goals that we're trying to accomplish. But for me personally, outside of what we want to do broadly, I'm trying to build a channel community for progressive values, progressive policies, and trying to get the broadest consensus on how we can push those policies forward. I don't want the channel to just be about me, my ego, trying to inflate, my own sense of self-worth. I already have a day job. I'm doing this because I'm just really passionate about it. So for today, what we're going to look into is three main things. One, the Nina Turner election, and how unfortunately that panned out. I know I personally and a lot of people that I agree with on the left, we're hoping to see Nina Turner pull that out in, I believe it's Ohio's 11th district. Something, again, a lot less fun than even a progressive loss. Andrew Cuomo's harassment scandal, which just hour by hour seems to be getting worse and worse. And then finally, I want to take a look at the Vaush and Charlie Kirk debate. I watched a few segments today on this, a few streamers that I'm taking note of. I saw Demon Mama's reaction to it for a little bit. Again, it's kind of on in the background as I'm working. I'm mostly locked in during the day. I believe I saw Demon Mama's, saw Shark Zero's reaction to it. All really good takes. So I'm just going to take a more in-depth look on it on my end, give my opinions. And overall, I think he did a fantastic job, especially going up against somebody like Charlie Kirk. There's not much ground you can cede, especially if he's being so amicable. It's hard to yell at somebody directly to their face. So overall, and I know it was going to be a 2-on-1 debate with Tim Pool there, Charlie Kirk obviously there, working with what Vaush had to work with, and Tim kept pulling up statistics. I think he did a brilliant job. One of the reasons why I admire him as a streamer, rhetorician, and debater. So let us get started with the Nina Turner election. So as everybody knows by now, Democrats Northeastern Ohio's 11th district. That's why they're having a special election. I wasn't really sure. So the HUD Secretary, Marcia Fudge, was nominated by President Biden. That's why currently there's an open seat. I really wasn't sure why there was a special election. Seems these days people are just getting kicked out of Congress for sexual harassment these days. So at least she was nominated to HUD, and it wasn't something terrible that she got kicked out of office. Hello. Welcome to the channel. So glad to have you. So Shontel Brown, unfortunately, she's more of a Democratic establishment candidate backed by Hillary Clinton. I know that name, especially in progressive circles, is pretty taboo. Originally, I couldn't tell why these were in two separate colors, but I'm assuming Summit and Cuyahoga County. I was kind of struggling there for a bit, trying to figure out, why would they cut the one district in half, but obviously it's got to be county lines, right? So later on in the night, I think she conceded around 10 p.m. So yeah, Nina Turner gave it her best shot. I just want to give progressives out there some solemn words that, it's not the death of the movement. You run into roadblocks, you fight the good fight, you keep it up, and you do the best you can. At the end of the day, we got to win. Not to say that Shontel Brown, I hopefully won't be a bad congresswoman who will push for more progressive legislation. Overall, it's better than having any Republican in the seat, or any seat rather. So going forward, I think we're just going to need to try harder. I know Democratic Party. So mostly a social democrat, so I'm mostly a liberal on that front. So I am really pushing for more progressive policies. I was a Warren Democrat since I'm in New Jersey, and in the primaries, we don't really get to vote essentially till June, so the primary is usually over. So I wrote in Elizabeth Warren, even though, Biden ultimately won, and I voted for Biden, obviously, in the general election. But when it came down to Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, if I had the opportunity, I was going to go for Bernie Sanders. So let's see what the brilliant minds at Morning Joe had to say.
For Shontel Brown, whose campaign highlighted her loyalty to President Joe Biden, won a special election primary Tuesday in Ohio's 11th congressional district, defeating Bernie Sanders-backed Nina Turner. Chantel will be our guest in just a moment. But first, some background on the race. As the New York Times' Jeremy Peters reports, Brown, who vowed to be a partner with the Biden administration and Speaker Nancy Pelosi, prevailed over Nina Turner, a party outsider who openly rejected the idea that Democrats are more effective through conciliation and compromise.
Now, she seems more in the vein to me of who just won in New York? It was Eric Adams. Not quite a progressive at all by any means. Very in line with the Democratic structural party lines. Not my favorite candidate. I don't think she's a supporter of Medicare for all, which is one of the biggest issues. Student loan debt, student loan reform, higher education reform. The best thing that we can do at this point, especially in the House, is try to push from the left the Democratic representatives. That's the best thing that we can do at this point. They have a very slim margin in the House, as I'm sure a lot of people know. So there's a lot of power to wield there. And I don't think people who are trying to completely agitate, not advocate from the left or push from the left to get more progressive policies, people like Jimmy Dore, who are just, why don't we just burn everything to the ground? It's almost like a Trump mentality, the Molotov cocktail into Congress. I don't think that's really going to help anybody, and he didn't advocate for Nina Turner or Chantel Brown. I think he just wants to agitate people and make them angry, essentially.
The race was not as much emblematic of a liberal-moderate divide among Democrats as it was a clash between an insider who rose fast in local party circles and an agitator who thrived on alienating party leaders by questioning their commitment to liberal ideals. Brown drew the support of such institutions as the Congressional Black Caucus and Representative James Clyburn of South Carolina, who
If you want to blame anybody for the election of Joe Biden, because a lot of people wrote him off even before the South Carolina primaries, it was Jim Clyburn that gave him the gas that he needed. I do hear a lot of the time, not in the USA. Where are you from? Far East Korea. One of my good friends, he's a Marine. He served over in South Korea in Seoul. He absolutely loved it there. He told all of us that we all need to definitely make a trip sometime. So welcome. Glad to have you with us. Oh, awesome. He was actually in the artillery division as a captain. He did ROTC in college when he went over there.
Visited the district and implored people to vote for Ms. Brown as someone who was respectful and willing to work with other Democrats, an implicit criticism of Ms. Turner's more confrontational style. Many criticized Turner openly, like Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi, who referred to Ms. Turner as a single solitary know-it-all. Brown's victory is a sign of a recent trend following moderate Eric Adams' recent win over progressives in the New York City mayoral race. Centrist Terry McAuliffe's victory in the Virginia gubernatorial primary, and, of course, Biden's win over Sanders in the presidential primary. And Chantel Brown joins us now. It's really good to have you.
Ms. Brown, congratulations. This must be such an exciting time for you.
Of course, Joe is just elated.
For a long time, this was seen as Nina Turner's race to lose. She was ahead in early polling by big margins. How did you do it? How did you win last night?
Well, thank you very much for having me this morning. I think that this came down to results. I have been a legislator for 9 consecutive years here in the district. So if all politics is local, I am as local as it gets. Long before we got the national attention, I had earned the support of more than 100 local elected officials, people who know what the needs are on the ground. Those include people like city council members, mayors, school board members, precinct folks. And so that was always our path to victory. So I want to be clear. I say this as humbly and respectfully as I can.
Well, I think, isn't she under investigation for ethics charges? I thought it was not going to make her a real viable candidate. But as much as I want to believe that the country is moving farther to the left, which even in this election result, I think we can see that it's starting to move farther to the left, but it's not quite where we need it, again, obviously. But yeah, there's just more moderate Democrats than we think, and I believe it's foolish to just completely ostracize them and cut them out of the progressive movement when out of the two options, there's one party, the Republican Party, that's just not going to listen to anything you have to say. And at least I have to hope that most Democrats will respond to grassroots action. So voting blue is always better, but I just don't think that in a lot of places in the United States, they're just not as progressive as I would like them to be, and as a lot of people who agree with me would like them to be. All right, so this was, when was this published? 27, okay, so last week. With a week to go before a special primary election in Ohio's 11th congressional district, Democratic candidate Shontel Brown may not be. Oh, I see. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, this is no good. Voting to award contracts to your romantic partner, obviously. She's claiming to be somebody that she's not. She just seems phony. That's why the connection with Hillary Clinton just seems so apropos, that she's advocating in a self-interested way. And Democrat or Republican, it's bad. I don't think this helps the movement to have somebody like this representing any district. But, it is what it is.
Didn't enter this race with any other expectation than to win. And I'm also proud to say I've been undefeated. So to God be the glory. Thank you so much.
Undefeated.
Well, it is so. What you said, really, I hope a lot of politicians, young and old, listen to it, because national endorsements, really, they don't carry you over the finish line. It's what your neighbors, it's what people in the community, people in your churches think of you, people in synagogues, what they think of you. So that makes so much sense. That being said, it was interesting. Reverend Al, a good friend, Reverend Al Sharpton, texted me this morning, excited about your victory, talking about how your victory was a victory for common sense and reconciliation. Of course, Jim Clyburn, just a great guy, came in early, too. Are you surprised by the national attention this race garnered?
No, actually not. When I entered the race and I knew that the other
I don't know if Reverend Al Sharpton still has that show on MSNBC. It was painful to watch. It's not so much that his views are wrong or incorrect. I am sure we align mostly on a lot of things and a lot of issues, but it was more of his rhetoric or his style, I would say. It's an antiquated style of speaking on a news network. It's very preacher. Again, he's a reverend, obviously. He's Reverend Al Sharpton. But the rhetoric style that he was putting on air, it kind of reminds me of, to draw a parallel, when movies first came onto the big screen. I know we're throwing it way back, but those black and white movies, when the actors, they would really kind of project their voices, because the only real acting in the world at the time was stage acting. When they had the film, they were still acting as if they were on stage. I think that's why he didn't really translate to the television medium, because he was still talking from a pulpit. It was hard to watch. I don't know if he still has the show on there.
Candidate who had been campaigning for Senator Sanders would be entering the race as well. We expected the national attention. She's been on the national stage for the last 4.5 years. And so we were prepared for this. So it didn't come as a total surprise. But I think the fact that, we came out victorious is probably more surprising to other folks, but certainly, again, was the expectation. So I couldn't be more proud of my team and the work that they did to help get me here. Yes, I am the candidate that won the race and I'm getting all of the attention, but this was a team effort. To your point, you pointed out some of the members that came out from the CDC to help campaign on my behalf, and they highlighted the fact that politics is a team sport. You even said it yourself, Joe, this morning. You get to victories by addition, not subtraction. So making friends is part of the business.
Ms. Brown, it's Willie Geist. Congratulations on your win last night. I know you were just focused throughout the campaign and probably still this morning on the 11th district where you won last night. But many other people, as we said earlier, are projecting national implications onto this race. They were watching with great interest to see if someone like you, who sided more with the Biden administration, viewed as more pragmatic, or an insurgent candidate like Nina would win yesterday. So what do you believe, as you take a step back
even in 2017,
what do you
that special
believe
election
this
with
race
Connor
means
Lamb
outside of the 11th district? Does it tell us
I'm not sure
anything
which
about where
district,
the
but it was in
Democratic Party
Pennsylvania
is?
where you won a special election.
I think you kind
immediate
of touched on
off-year
the top
elections
of this conversation. It is trending
are
in
almost
that
always national interest. Just to try to get it, it's a way to gauge the temperature of the country at the time. Unfortunately, our temperature is morbid on the progressive side, since we didn't pull this one out.
Can really erase all of the time and effort and energy that I've put in over my time as an elected official to work with people, to focus on the issues, to find common ground and go from there. So I think that we are seeing that is what most Americans want. We had 4 years of an administration that just was polarizing and divisive. And so I think people are more focused on making sure that we can come out of this pandemic successfully. As we talk about the Delta variant that is continuing to become a problem, people want to know how they're going to recover. People are concerned about their communities being safe. I couldn't be, that was another subject that came up on the campaign trail. So with the Biden-Harris administration talking about gun violence being an epidemic and investing those resources, those are the things that people on the ground were concerned about when I was knocking doors and meeting them where they were. So those are the things that I think will...
It's easy just to start throwing your weight behind it. I think I'm going to really need to just take a look at her. I'm optimistic that she's more progressive than I'm thinking.
So it's always been about people for me. The interesting thing about that story is I found out, like many of our communities, we can use some improvement. So rather than complain, I'm a person that believes in being the change that I want to see. And so I decided to roll up my sleeves and pound the pavement, knock doors, introduce myself to my neighbors, and tell them that I wanted to be their city council person. And they were quick to...
All right. So, yeah, we get it. We get it. So moving on from something that is rather depressing to something that is very depressing, which, of course, is Andrew Cuomo. So Biden spoke in a press conference, and I believe he said that Andrew Cuomo should resign. Knowing Andrew Cuomo, obviously not personally, his political style and tactic, I think you're going to have to try to drag him out of that office kicking and screaming.
Mississippi is up 125%. Alabama is up 186%.
Even though we're covering Cuomo right now, this is also very depressing. People aren't getting vaccinated, especially in southern red states. We're going to watch the Vaush Charlie Kirk debate later, and you can see how somebody like Charlie Kirk pushing conspiracy theories and false notions on what the vaccine does and how effective they are leads to exactly this crisis.
I'll take a few questions.
Mr. President, I have a question for you on coronavirus, but first I'd like to start with the news of the day, given back in March you said that if the investigation confirmed the allegations against Governor Cuomo, then he should resign. So will you now call on him to resign, given the investigator said the 11 women were credible?
I stand by that statement.
Are you now calling on him to resign?
Yes.
And if he doesn't resign, do you believe he should be impeached and removed from office?
Let's take one thing at a time here.
Yes.
I think he should resign. I understand that the state legislature may decide to impeach.
They're going to.
I don't know that for a fact. I've not read all that data.
And he's using a photo of you embracing him in his self-defense to say that these are commonplace kind of embraces that he made and the allegations against him. Do you condone that?
What was he grabbing Biden's ass in these hugs? I think he got accused by 11 women by last count. Let's take a look at the Times. Accusations from 11 women constituting sexual harassment under federal and New York state law. Specifically, we find the governor sexually harassed a number of current and former New York state employees by, among other things, engaging in non-consensual touching, as well as making numerous offensive comments of suggestive and sexual nature. Since approximately late 2019, the governor engaged in a pattern of inappropriate conduct with an executive assistant here. The pattern of conduct included 1, close and intimate hugs. I think that picture of Joe Biden is pretty solid now as a defense. Hugs are hugs. Kisses on the cheek, forehead, and at least 1 kiss on the lips. I mean, none of this is surprising. Andrew Cuomo, he's just a creepy looking dude. Just like, the Joe Biden when he was smelling people's hair. I'm still shocked that he got out of the primaries, but with all of that baggage, it was just weird. He's an old guy sniffing hair. I don't know. This obviously is much, much worse. On the spectrum of Blizzard Activision and Joe Biden sniffing hair, it's like right there. Blizzard Activision was rampant. I may even have to drop it down a little bit for Andy there, because a woman committed suicide with Activision Blizzard. I didn't get a chance to cover that, but that was terrible. It was just scathing, and especially the gaming industry. We're going to see more of that to come. I am a gamer as well, so I'm guilty of being a nerdy gamer. But I think a lot of those gaming studios, once they had the ability and the resources to really start to use their power in a terrible fashion, they did not hesitate. So that whole notion of, the jock in high school and the nerdy kid, who likes to play video games, never gets the girl. It's not a character flaw in the jock, it seems. It seems that those nerdy kids would jump at the opportunity to do the exact same thing, and even to a worse extent. And then Andy Cuomo here, of course, just abusing his power and trying to, get some tail as the governor. It's not 1964 anymore where you can just do that shit. It was never okay. It's even more not okay, and he was doing this in 2019. I mean, even if this was his proclivity beforehand, wouldn't you think he would have the sense to rein it the fuck in or knock it the hell off? Not to say that any conduct pre-Me Too is fine. How stupid can you be, man?
Look, I'm not going to fly-spec this. I'm sure there are some embraces that were totally innocent. But apparently the Attorney General decided there were things that weren't.
Coronavirus, if I could ask you a question about the evictions. No, thank you.
So, going from Nina Turner, sad loss, to Andrew Cuomo, who needs to get the hell out of office. So we're going to move over to the Vaush and Charlie Kirk debate. We'll come down the second half of the stream, so we're about 30 minutes in. I'm usually going to do these for an hour just to start off. So why don't we do something a little fun, and we'll take a look at the Charlie Kirk and Vaush debate.
And this resulted in news articles saying chaos in Sydney. People aren't, they're not following the rules. The vaccination rate in Australia is ridiculously low. I think it's 18%, really, really low. Well, then they called in police, and there were big protests. Now they've actually deployed military. So I'm curious if either of you wants to jump in with your thoughts on mandates. What would happen if they came here, if you're for or against them?
Look, there are elements of mandates that I can agree with. We've already set standards for other things like the MMR vaccine, very basic standard vaccines that we expect everyone get before they can go to school, travel. And I think for the most part that's worked. We've eradicated plagues from the world. I think we should be proud of that. With regards to COVID, since this is an ongoing pandemic, we need to focus on approaches that are effective and that don't ostracize or exacerbate tensions. With regard to the Australian situation, it's not something I'm extensively familiar with, but generally speaking, I don't think that cracking down on protests is going to be an effective way to incentivize people to get vaccinated. What's happening in New York might be, but my main issue with it is that I'm not entirely sure how they expect people to still have their vaccination card. I know that there's been some confusion from the beginning as to whether or not you should keep that. I know people have thrown theirs away. They made it too big for wallets. It just felt a little bit haphazardly planned from the forego, so that's unfortunate. Maybe they can find other ways to incentivize it, like for example in schools where they have a direct access to
Vaush is right. I don't know why. I think he hasn't quite got into it yet, but just clips from earlier today. I think he's talking about how the vaccine card, if anybody has their vaccine card, they're fucking huge. They don't fit into a wallet. I think Trin, my girlfriend who just joined us, she had to order us vaccine card holders specifically for us to take our vaccines into New York. We live pretty close to Manhattan. We're going to need to get these laminated or somehow and bring them with us everywhere we go in New York, which I like, but it was just such poor planning from the beginning to hand out these cards that don't fit in anything that anybody carries. Where was the foresight on that? And I know you can take a picture of it, but still, why wouldn't they do something more substantial than a paper card written in pen that doesn't fit anywhere? But I digress.
Government records where they wouldn't have to use those little cards, That might be a little bit better. I guess we'll have to see.
Well, I'm not saying you believe this, but some people on the left, I never want to hear about the discussion of voter ID ever again. Because now you can force people to identify their medical history to try to get into a restaurant in New York City. Yeah, look, I'm not getting the vaccine, so I'm part of the 100 million people that are.
So just a side note from what he's talking about. When I was in college, I bought a car near Newark, New Jersey, which is a very heavily populated city in New Jersey, obviously. Right in the middle of the day, it wasn't a weekend. I believe it was like a Wednesday afternoon. I had to go to the DMV to get new plates right from where I bought the car. Car ended up being a piece of shit. It was terrible. Things started smoking immediately after, we got the plates on it. It sucked, regardless. So we go to Newark just to get plates on it in the middle of the day. The line at the DMV to get an ID, to get plates, anything that has to do with the Department of Motor Vehicle, it took us the rest of the day just to get plates, something simple. Now, when somebody like Charlie Kirk comes on and he talks about, we want to implement voter ID, that would be okay with me in a compromise where we get automatic voter registration at 18, and the government sends you a voter ID, but it would have to be passed federally and then implemented on a state level. There'd have to be a lot of intricate moving parts in order to make sure that everybody has access easily to a voter ID. It's a solution in search of a problem. We don't see any voter fraud, in-person voter fraud. The few cases that we have seen were, I think one person in Pennsylvania tried to vote for Trump twice, one for him, one for his mother. So again, it's a solution in search of a problem. In a grander bargain, in the sense of trying to get something passed substantially in the voting and electoral department, I can see that going into effect. But telling people that they need to, one, take time off work, have the funds and the ability to get to a DMV or anywhere that you can get a voter ID, depending on which state you're in, a lot of people don't have the means to access them. So somebody like Charlie Kirk saying, like, oh, we're going to need a vaccine card that you get when you're vaccinated, they hand them right to you. I don't see the equivalency there, where it's not your fundamental constitutional right to walk into a bar in Manhattan. I think it's necessary for the time being. The epidemic, or pandemic rather, of people who are unvaccinated, we did our time. The people that sucked it up, stayed inside, wore a mask, got our vaccines when we had to, we put the work in. We deserve to go out to these bars, to these restaurants, to socialize again. And if you want to go off into the woods and build a fort, build a tent, build a log cabin, and that's what you want to do, you want to hunt for food now, not remain vaccinated because that's your right, go right ahead. But you don't get to continually spread a variant of a virus and possibly make it stronger for the people that actually put the work in. So to equate a vaccine card that is for the entire good of the country and ultimately the world to a voter ID, it's silly. It makes no sense.
That are unvaccinated. And it's an experimental vaccine. The FDA and CDC has said that in January. It's questionably effective. Lindsey Graham just came down with COVID. You had a ship in the United Kingdom, 100% vaccinated ship that came down with COVID. It's more like a treatment than a vaccine. I'll leave that conversation to Dr. Brett Weinstein and the people that really understand how that works.
That doesn't mean.
But yeah, this is medical apartheid. This is trying to create a two-tiered system where if you don't make the proper medical decisions, you're not able to go to Broadway shows or go into restaurants, even when the efficacy of this vaccine is questionable at best. We see that in Israel, an 85% vaccinated country that's about to lock down again.
Questionable
and
at
most
best.
of the new cases are from vaccinated patients, not unvaccinated patients.
See, this
in
is
Israel.
just disinformation.
So,
this
sorry, I'm going to interject him. But
yeah,
obviously against mandates, and I think people should be able to make their own medical decisions. I think it's pretty obvious.
Well, I disagree. I think we actually have a story we wrote on timcast.com that our view of the lockdowns is that it's alarmism because a new study from the Public Health of England found the Pfizer vaccine is 96% effective after 2 doses at staving off the Delta variant, and AstraZeneca was 92%.
I could probably agree it's alarmism.
Look at Tim Pool pulling out some actual real statistics and facts.
But it's enough of an alarm for the public health leaders to undermine the argument that the vaccine is a solution to what would possibly satisfy the public. So, I mean, I was against the lockdowns in the first place. Let me be very clear when there was 1,000 deaths a day.
So what's your remedy?
But sorry, go ahead.
No lockdowns,
well, a couple
no
of
vaccine.
points on this. First of all, it's experimental in the sense that there was an expedited process for its release, but there have been full and extensive studies taken on the safety and effectiveness of these vaccines. The reason why the FDA study hasn't been finished, the reason why it hasn't been fully vetted, isn't because they're looking for long-term health effects, is because they're determining the extent to which it protects you over a long period of time. Ergo, the fact of the matter is, by all available data, this is undeniably much safer to get the vaccine. I mean, by orders of magnitude.
Let me ask you a question.
Well, wait, a couple things, because you said a few things there. There are some instances where areas have more people being infected if they're already vaccinated. But if you take a look at, this is like data mining. If you take a look at the broader statistics, especially here in America, the number of people who have gotten breakthrough cases is something like 0.003% of people who have been vaccinated. You can take a look at the numbers. Where is this new wave exploding? It's in the unvaccinated. In spite of the fact that fewer and fewer people are remaining unvaccinated, the vaccinated stay relatively healthy. And not only do they get infected way less often, they also suffer far fewer severe symptoms. Their hospitalization rates have plummeted, and their deaths are incredibly low compared to people who are unvaccinated. This is by all means an effective vaccine.
What's your opinion of Johnson & Johnson, the FDA saying that it might cause a rare nerve disease?
That's something that, first of all, when you take a look at that, you have to recognize that
1 in a million.
Even if that was the case.
Which the FDA says it is.
Right. Well, they're looking into it, of course. It does seem...
issued an official warning that it could issue a rare nerve disease. That's a big deal.
Could issue, of course. They're looking into it, and that is something to look into and to be concerned about.
What's your opinion of VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System?
Hold on.
I'm just curious because
let's do the Gillian Bearson
job. Doing a really effective job at being reasonable. Essentially, he's just being extremely reasonable and measured with his responses, and that's why you keep seeing Charlie Kirk running down talking point after talking point, because none of it is sticking to him. That's why Vaush is good at what he does.
I think you want to.
Yeah, so of course, stuff like that can happen. Now, even if that claim is the case, it would remain the fact that unless the extent of that potential nerve damage is just apocalyptically severe, that the effects of getting COVID would still be far, far worse than the potential side effects of that vaccine. However, if you were to say, let's say worst case, Johnson & Johnson, it's not viable, that gets pulled, we see what the consequences are, that doesn't really speak against the greater viability of the vaccines. I got Pfizer, for example. We're talking hundreds of millions of people who have either been protected against the vaccine in part, or if they get it, against the virus, or if they get it, their effects, their symptoms are much, much, much more manageable.
So I just want to play into the irony here that I'm the one criticizing the pharmaceutical companies and you're the one defending. I just think I think it's delicious.
That's an extremely. This is classic, non-playable character dialogue tree. Everything Vaush is saying is super agreeable. Any person with half a brain, and it seems even Charlie Kirk can't seem to really weasel out of this. That's why he has to go to this weird low blow that Vaush is somehow advocating for big pharma. People with diabetes, I want them to get their insulin. Oh, that must mean you're in for big pharma. No, I just think sick people should get their medicine, and people need preventative measures like vaccines so they do not get sick. And it's an unfortunate circumstance that we have to rely on at the behest of these big pharma giants in order to get public health initiatives passed. But that's just how we organize the economy. That's how we organize our healthcare system, unfortunately.
Dishonest talking point.
Well, you're peddling the Pfizer vaccine. You're saying it's so effective. Somebody's taking it. And I'm the one saying, hold on, maybe AstraZeneca, Moderna,
Charlie,
Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer.
This is let's talk about the points he's made. And
no, I was just enjoying the
Tim Pool's
the thing is,
it's
not really like irony if you understand the issue at hand. See, my praise doesn't go to the pharmaceutical companies or their CEOs. It goes to the tireless workers who spend months and months developing these vaccines.
Who's getting rich from this vaccine?
Well, hold on. Have I at any point praised the distribution or profiteering system?
Who do you think gets rich
Pfizer?
from vaccine mandates? The workers or the Pfizer CEO?
Nobody's talking about who gets rich. This is a toothless...
Isn't that your whole shtick?
This is a toothless critique that you could...
Let's try and go back and forth.
This is a toothless critique that you could apply to literally anything that you don't like. Everything in this country is manufactured to the profit of CEOs.
We don't mandate it, and so you can't go to restaurants if you don't get one of four major pharmaceutical medicines.
Wait, I just want to say, if that's your criticism...
That's one of many.
Then you should... So if that's the criticism you want to focus on, I'm in favor of nationalizing the pharmaceutical industry. I'm willing to take it that far. But whether or not that's on the table, and I can't just make that happen, when we're talking strictly about the effectiveness of the vaccine,
these pharmaceutical
it's not a praise of the capitalist industry.
These pharmaceutical industries already, they take public data, public research that we all fund, take it, and then profit from it. It happens all the time. That's why when you see a lot of Republicans pushing for more and more privatization, it's a bad thing to take a completely left turn in unrelated topic. During the Trump administration, we have NOAA. Remember when Trump drew on that map, and it was hilarious because Trump do dumb things. What he wanted to do was, and he was getting pushed by the guy who owns AccuWeather. So the guy who owns AccuWeather is a private company that you Google the weather and it gives you updates, but it specifically takes government data and then profits from it. So he was pushing to completely privatize that system so he could profit from it, and kept lobbying Trump for that. That is what they're talking about when they're trying to privatize things, in essence. And you can see how taking that the public good just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. We're at the hyper-capitalistic society that we live in now. Vaush is 100% correct that nationalizing the pharmaceutical industry, because they're using our data research anyway, that we fund, would be a good thing. So then that would just completely rip the rug out from under people like Charlie Kirk. Want to say, so now you're on the side of big pharma? I just find that ironic. Well, no, we never were.
Behind
I was just enjoying the irony. It's
not irony.
Well, it's totally ironic because I'm the one saying that they might be lying to us. And you're the one that's saying it's super effective.
Wait, what?
Which usually, if we were wearing our traditional uniforms, right versus left, it would be the other way around. That's all I'm saying.
The only comment I'm making
what
is
do you have to say about VAERS, though? What do you have
vaccine.
to say about the vaccine adverse event reporting system that says, well, over 7,000 people experienced death after getting the vaccine? Does that worry you?
The VAERS system is entirely self-reported. I don't think it's generally used
Do you think
to
it's
form an accurate
underreported
metric.
or overreported?
With VAERS, it's almost impossible to say. You know what VAERS is, right? Can you tell me what VAERS is?
Yeah, VAERS is a government website that physicians or individuals can submit complaints.
Just the fight in Vaush's eyes there.
Mandates.
This is,
the
so
workers
this,
or
this
the
is
Pfizer CEO?
Nobody's talking about who gets rich. This is a toothless...
Isn't that your whole left? It would be the other way around. That's all I'm saying.
The only comment I'm making
what,
is
what do you
as
have to
the
say about
effectiveness
VAERS,
of the
though? What do you have to
vaccine.
say about the vaccine adverse event reporting system that says, well, over 7,000 people experienced death after getting the vaccine? Does that worry you?
The VAERS system is entirely self-reported. I don't think it's generally used
Do you think
to
it's
form an accurate
underreported
metric.
or overreported?
With VAERS, it's almost impossible to say. You know what VAERS is, right? Can you tell me what VAERS is?
He wanted
VAERS
him
is
to bite.
a government website that
wanted him to bite the
physicians
dust
or
on that really
individuals
badly.
can
I
submit
wish Charlie
complaints
Kirk
or
would've
concerns after
done a
an
swing and a miss there.
adverse
That would've
event
been great, but-
report from a vaccine, since you cannot win in court against
To Charlie Kirk's defense, he is always very prepared with his talking points. Vaush isn't thinking that he wouldn't have been prepared for that, but it would have been good if he didn't.
the vaccine production company. Then they go through some process where the government then can distribute some form of remedy if you had an adverse event reaction.
Right,
That's what VAERS is.
And researchers like it because if you take a vaccine or you get some other procedure, any medical drug done, you can report the effects there, and it can be a way of gathering sort of aggregate data concerning the effects of these potential treatments. The problem is researchers don't use this as a bulletproof way of determining the outcome or effect of anything because they're literally just unvetted online submissions that anybody can put in.
So I
I ask you because I want to know, how do you arrive at the conclusion that how
So
many
they're
people
like-
did you say?
well,
Blake?
like Amazon
it's
reviews.
VAERS' own data is 7,000 plus, and most of which,
address
by the
the
way,
VAERS
anyone
bots.
can submit. But
no,
I'm asking
by
how
the way,
do you
most of
arrive-
which are physicians submitted. Just so you know, these
the
are
total number.
most of the submissions on the VAERS website are done by like family doctors or local physicians. So I'm just asking, what number of adverse event reactions would you say maybe there's something wrong?
But I'm asking, how do you-
10,000 deaths.
how do you know these deaths were caused by
20,000 deaths?
vaccines?
No, I'm just saying that's what VAERS says, right?
No, wait, but so I need to know this.
We
because
don't.
You can, so
That's the
VAERS
question.
So wait, is these just people who have died after taking the vaccine? Like they may have died from some medical incident afterwards, and
Yeah,
it just gets put up
This
there.
is
and we're
this is
saying
the
that
question.
And doctors aren't completely immune from having a political bias. So out of we'll say there's 100,000 doctors out there, 4,000 of them we don't have a political bias that want to misappropriate, or misallocated death to a vaccine. I mean, we saw that woman who's a nurse, a registered nurse, who believed in demon sperm. So, yeah, I mean, trust the doctors, but trust the aggregate of doctors. These self-reporting data points, they are valid, and there are rabbit holes that you can start following to see if there are broader trends attached to them. But to take them as empirical fact, like Charlie Kirk is doing, is simply foolish.
Usually a vaccine gets pulled when you have 15 attributable deaths. We have 7,000 that we have to go through. The question is, when do you call time out and say, maybe we should
You're not answering the
mandate
question.
it?
How do you know that they're from the vaccine?
We don't. That's the
Exactly.
point.
Oh,
but you
okay.
don't either. But the position is, let's mandate experimental medicine. We don't know actually what's happening.
Wait, if
This
you
is
don't
very
know,
Donald
then how can you
Rumsfeld
say that
unknown
medical
knowns.
doctors are the one uploading this information? Is there
because
any methodology you're
we
looking at
we
to
do
determine
know
these
who's
deaths were
actually
from it?
uploading it. We know that. We know the entries are usually
What are the
and
claims
typically
being made?
traditionally. How about menstrual cycle disruption, loss of nerve
That
capacity?
was a planned. That was a planned talking point, like everything he does. But that one was specifically malicious to disincentivize women from getting the vaccine. Because, my sister, Trin, my girlfriend, a lot of women were hesitant to get the vaccine because they were scared that it was going to disrupt their ability to have children later on in life. And to hit on that is a scumbag move. Say, well, if you take the vaccine, say goodbye to having kids. It's not even that. Even if it's not true from any of the data that we've seen, no disruption. Fantastic. Thank you, Trin. For him to target one of the main fears of a lot of women in the country, to prevent them from taking a potentially life-saving vaccine. I don't know how these people sleep at night. Not even ironically, the trope of every streamer. Unironically. Hey, Rach, how are you?
Unable to walk, paralysis, miscarriages.
See, he's just going to drive
mood
that point
changes.
home.
Also, you can go
Be
through the
afraid
VAERS
women
database.
to take the
That's
vaccine.
interesting.
Mood
I-
changes. What about the death?
Let me interject
Death
something
is
real quick.
7,000 plus. That's a serious
I
number.
wanna-
How do they know it's from the vaccine? I keep asking you this. You don't.
Let
have
me
an
let me
answer.
let me address 2 points, one from each of you, real quick, so we can try and How do we know it's from the vaccine? It's
he originally pulled out that figure of
I would say that if you
of
have
15 people,
a mass
right?
vaccination program,
So now he's saying
which
it's
goes out
7,000.
330
So,
million doses or
15
so,
confirmed
and
deaths
then
from a
people
vaccine.
start saying, hey, I got the
We
vaccine
pull
when
it.
this happened.
When we have 7,000 reports, and Vaush is just asking, well, are they factually attributable to the vaccine in order to pull it? Charlie Kirk doesn't care if they're actually factually attributable to the vaccine. All he does is care about spreading fear to not take the vaccine. To what end, though? I'll never understand. To what end? People are going to die. People have died. More than World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War combined. But he's just going to keep spreading this message and getting people killed.
VAERS isn't here to say it is or isn't. They're here to say, can we find a pattern in this? And I think 7,000 suggests there may be one at the very least. I'm not a scientist, so I can't stress that. I will also say, however, to Charlie, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, it's a side effect.
I always mispronounce
It's a bad sign.
Guillain-Barré. There you go.
Actual,
my understanding is actually a side
voice
effect
of
of
reason.
many vaccines.
He's doing
Yeah, it
a
is.
decent
And so,
job.
Totally, that's correct.
moderating.
It could be.
Well, so the
I'm
issue I have
surprised.
is one of the things that Vaush brought up is that there's been, how many you mentioned, 100 million, 160 million?
So far.
115, I think it is, million.
Who have been fully vaccinated?
Fully vaccinated.
I think in that ballpark.
So,
Maybe a
of
bit
course, you know, if you have something very different from any other vaccination we normally do, because we're not having everyone do it all at once.
Yeah, and so this is a mass inoculation thing. And so here's why the American system
should
should answer this question easily. When you have any sort of uncertainty or disagreement, yield to rights.
So
yield to rights. Allow people to say no. Let me just build out the argument, right? So for me, for example, I'm 27. I don't consider COVID to be a largely disproportionate risk to my way of life. I don't know about this vaccine. I have gotten other vaccines in my life. So I want to be able to have the right to say no to that. So the American system, Constitution,
then fuck off to the
kind
woods,
of like
Charlie.
the tradition, is to be able to have people have nuance,
small-faced
preferences, and individualism. When it comes to these sort of complex issues, not saying you can't go to a restaurant because we want you to take experimental medicine.
Right. So a couple of points on that. First of all, if we're speaking to legal rights, the Supreme Court found over a century ago that when it came to vaccinations, this was a special exemption from some people's rights to.
I will agree with you that the courts are not on my side.
1904 in that one. And there's a reason why. Because, of course, when you choose not to take the vaccine, you contribute to the removal of others' freedoms. See, it's true. You do have a freedom to not or to take a vaccine. But I think other people should have the freedom to not grow up in a world ridden by plague. And with the way this disease, COVID, mutates with time, as all diseases do, inevitably, if it continues to circle the world long enough, and this is an international problem, not just an American one, new strains will develop, which will slowly ebb at the effectiveness of this set of vaccines. So it threatens all of us. May I say one other thing? Sorry. With all of that being said, just to speak for VARS, VARS is an incredibly effective system for locating and roughly attributing concerns related to the effects of drugs. The problem is that there are several elements to this disease that make it really difficult to pinpoint anything specific. The two of which being A, hundreds of millions of people vaccinated. That is a huge range to pull data from. And B, the propagandist fear campaign about an incredibly effective vaccine process that may lead people to misattribute
I just want to get a quick
clarification
clarification
to vaccines.
Sorry.
Just quick clarification. Are you for mandating
in the eyes of that
COVID-19
misinformation
vaccine?
campaign?
The same way we have other
leading
vaccines, like
people
school,
to
travel,
die.
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, like, what if someone wanted to go to a restaurant or a supermarket or a movie theater?
I think that, we don't have that for other vaccines, right? Like every time you go to a movie theater, you have a little card. I understand that might be an effective panic measure, but long term, my goal would be to integrate it into the same revenue of vaccines.
I think that's a more reasonable response than some politicians. I'm just going to be honest.
People are panicking.
No, I think that's a more
well.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we weren't having misunderstanding.
No, I think that's more of a reasonable answer. I just curious, just on the vaccine topic in general. Are you concerned by Dr. Malone coming out, who literally invented the mRNA vaccine and says that there's a dangerous spike protein involved, and he encourages people to think twice before getting it? Does that move you at all?
I had to look up Dr. Malone before this, and I just think his research is just overblown. Yeah, I don't know. You can judge for yourself. I don't find Dr. Malone very credible. He just looks a little bit out there to me, and from what I've heard, he's a bit overrated. All right,
You're free to speak with your doctor when it comes to
Dr. Malone, just his specific commentary. The guy who invented this type of vaccine.
Well, I'm not a PhD, and I doubt that he was directly involved
I've heard
in
Dr.
the
Malone
production
actually.
of these
No, he
vaccines.
literally invented this.
The mRNA,
vaccine.
but with the Johnson
again,
Johnson, the Pfizer.
But he's very, very aware of the sort of accelerated implementation. He's trying to call time out and tell people this is not like any other vaccine. Does that worry you? His claim is that it involves a spike protein. It was rushed to market. It's going to have side effects. You don't understand it like I did. I invented this. And you got to think twice before mandating it or even taking it if you're under a certain age. Does that bother you?
What makes the current...
Spike protein are what make it a corona, correct? I mean, I'm way out of my depth on this. The spike proteins in a coronavirus are like when you see the ball with the dots on top of it, that's the corona, the crown, the spike proteins. So I don't really know what that would have to do with messenger ribonucleic acid. It just seems like a bullshit talking point and fear-mongering.
Scientific community rather than, with respect to you and myself, YouTubers.
Well, no, I agree. But the question is which scientists, right? So there's a lot of scientists speaking out against this. Dr. Brett Weinstein, Dr. Malone.
What
right?
is Dr. Brett Weinstein's
He's an
specialty?
evolutionary biologist, so he knows a little bit about how
not virology.
Cellular function works.
That is not virology. That is a completely spurious
so let me
association.
do you trust Fauci more or Dr. Brett Weinstein?
It's not about Fauci. It's about Fauci.
He's a virologist who's been wrong about everything.
It's about the global... Well, hold on. He's smiling with glee here. It's the global medical community in this regard.
You mean like the WHO?
No, I'm not... Hold on. Wait,
put a name behind it.
He's very excited. Let's... I just want to say, it's not just about the WHO. We're talking about a unified effort on the part of virtually every country on earth to get a hold of the vaccines that us Americans are privileged to have. This isn't some like pharmaceutical Dr. Fauci push that wasn't broadly supported by any of the relevant experts. In the mRNA field, which is not huge because it's a very new development, internationally, there is a demand for these vaccines.
I wanted to add, just based on what you had said, I can pull up Reuters. Their fact check is that vaccines are not, quote, cytotoxic. They go on to mention that Robert Malone, and they show the Brett Weinstein podcast.
Coming up with
they show the
facts.
post. The FDA was alerted months ago that the spike protein in the COVID vaccines are cytotoxic, toxic to cells. The FDA did nothing. Reuters says this is not true. Now, the issue at hand is trust. Like you mentioned, you said, do you trust Fauci or Weinstein? I don't know if there is a fact-based argument if you have the doctors you trust and the doctors you trust or the organizations you trust.
So far,
it's a clash of who you believe, to be honest.
None of us have the credentials to just come up with these arguments on their own. There will always be bias in who we choose
I think he doesn't want to get.
However, given the plurality of people seem to support the safety and the effectiveness of the vaccine, and the fact that it doesn't take a virologist to notice that over 500,000 Americans have died of COVID, more than the combined death tolls of every war since World War I combined, including the Second World War in Vietnam. Those are things that I don't need to be a virologist to see. I can see it happening.
Can I ask you a question,
that's
though?
Pretty bad.
One of the issues that's brought up frequently, especially on Twitter, is that many of these COVID deaths are died with COVID, as it's brought up, where people would say something like it tends to be people who are over 70 or things like that. I'm only bringing that up not to make the argument, but because you said, how would VAERS know if these are actually related to the vaccine?
I'd love to respond to that if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
So COVID rarely, directly kills you. Like age, it causes a breakdown in other vital functions that then their death can be attributed to such. So, for example, of the many things that people die, it's not really COVID, it's just that COVID blanks their entire system internally. And
eventually... it's the spontaneous diabetic shock, or they had cardiovascular issues, they had emphysema, and that was that big push in the beginning by people like Steven Crowder that changed my mind that the death toll is too high. So you're telling me that somebody went into a diabetic shock while having this exacerbating virus and disease, and we're going to attribute that to a diabetic death, heart disease? No. People who are more liberal, people like Bill Maher, who say we just need to get our diets in order. Yes, absolutely. That is an initiative that we need to take, and which is a broad systemic issue on how we capitalize in our food markets and what we subsidize. Of course, that's an issue we need to take care of. But we're here now. Back in 2020, in March, April, May, people talking about food diets, at that point, it's irrelevant, man. People are dropping dead. So when they started to say that, these COVID numbers are inflated. I live in Jersey. I worked in New York. In March, I was still commuting into Manhattan. I saw what was going on. It was fucking scary. And for somebody like Charlie Kirk or Steven Crowder to be like, oh, no, they're misleading you.
Something fails, something breaks, and they die. There were people claiming that there were deaths being spuriously attributed to COVID-19 very early on in this pandemic, but thankfully we know that's not the case, because if you take a look at the excess mortality numbers, the number of people who should die every year in the United States, because there's a very normal pattern, normally with this many people in this country, we see an excess, starting when COVID started, that almost perfectly graphs on to the rising death waves of COVID. I mean, it perfectly tracks onto that.
I just want to say for you, Charlie, I think, the issue I see here is, for me, I can't trust or distrust. I don't know. I think Brett Weinstein's a very smart guy, and I don't think he's going to lie to me. And these doctors are very smart people. And then I see the government agencies that, I don't always trust the government, to be completely honest. I'm not a big fan. But to believe that there's like a nefarious effort or anything like that, ultimately what it comes down to is, in my opinion, having a trusted medical professional that you can consult with.
Well, I totally agree. And I think there could be an argument that if you're over the age of 70, that this vaccine might be a really good idea for you.
Over the age
However,
of 70.
to mandate it
Anybody
for
younger than that.
schools and for colleges, when these are highly complex medical decisions, that's where I'm going to push back against it.
Well, real
Rather
quick,
than
let me
complex.
point
They are
out, though,
complex
the
medical
Johnson &
decisions.
Johnson vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine, though. Is that's my understanding?
I
It's an
don't want to
MMR?
speak out of turn.
I believe so.
Yeah,
I would
think
love to be
that's right.
fact checked on that.
I'm not totally sure.
My memory is
So
faulty.
I guess another question I have: what do you think of alternative type treatments, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin?
Crystals.
Why the push for mass inoculation?
Well, because
Goop.
hydroxychloroquine studies
The
have
real
found
big
it largely
pharma.
ineffective. There was, I
It's
believe,
goop.
a French study that stopped when people started dying of heart failure. I think the only reason the right dies in this hill is because Trump mentioned it. I don't think there'd be a push for it otherwise. The vaccines are the effective way of getting mass populations inoculated. And while it is true that most of the people who die are ancient, the fact remains that people experience long-term side effects from getting COVID, even if they survive. I know people who are in their 30s, and me, a blistering 27-year-old myself, I'm not especially worried, but I've heard them talk about how much harder it is for them to climb up flights of stairs. I know that erectile dysfunction, fellas, is one of the listed potential side effects of getting COVID. Even young,
mean, that should
healthy,
just be
no
plastered
other problems. It is
All
true
over
that
Alabama,
death
Louisiana,
is most
just
comorbid with
billboards that say
age and pre-existing
COVID
conditions, but
causes
still.
erectile
And that's
dysfunction.
not even to speak of the COVID variants. I mean, right now we're on
You'll see
Delta,
levels
but
of-
if it keeps cycling around the world, let it go for another year. Who knows how bad
In
this
France,
could
when they said
get.
that they were going
So,
to mandate
Johnson-
the vaccine to go everywhere, and like 3 million people the next day jumped on to go get the vaccine, that would be the effect. If you just put it out there in the lower states and the southern states, you would see a giant spike.
Johnson is not an mRNA vaccine. So there's an alternative to mRNA if you're concerned about it.
And there was some guidance with the nerve disease with that. Sorry to interrupt.
I do think we kind of overlooked something really interesting, is that when did we mandate vaccinations in public schools?
Did I go back somewhere?
Well, I know the Supreme Court case concerning this was in 1904,
Yeah.
so I would know it would have to have been earlier than that. I know that Washington even had his troops vaccinated, though I
For
forget.
smallpox.
Yeah.
Smallpox, was it?
Yeah.
Which is pretty crazy to think
Inoculated, not vac. Yeah, you're right.
about. Right, I don't know what they did, hit people with a rock and then
It was
pour
like
liquid
a
in.
needle, I think.
It was-
and they would prick you with the needle that had like a weakened sample or something.
And they would have had to forge that needle, like with a blacksmith. Isn't that crazy to think about? Like Washington's,
I know, like someone pouring it, and then
Yeah.
today it's just a machine that
Well, it's
makes
like
it.
at the
That's just
homestead
wild
when
to
they
think
had to,
about.
they
Well,
built a
so-
house, and if they wanted to move,
Man,
they'd burn the house down and then go
I
around
think
and pick up the nails.
the real issue
because nails
for the
were
most part
expensive
is
and they had
just
to blacksmith.
mandatory.
Well, I just also have another question. Do you think that there might be any bad motives behind these 4 companies, AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson, considering they are
Charlie,
big
is
pharma?
there anything you can give me? Anything you can give me so I can just slip out of the debate? It's an L, Chuck. I think I'll call it there. So if you're with us tomorrow, I'm going to be on again at 7:30 Eastern time. Gonna have to figure out, the news of the day and try to be as up to date as I possibly can. But yeah, thank you all for joining us. And I'm Chadvocate, and thank you so much. Take care, everyone.